I have to admit, following Jason Cook is a tough act to follow, but we're going to go anyway. I hope you now have a better understanding of how important it is for each of you to be that positive role model that Jason talked about, and why it's so important for you to be one. Today, though, we're going to be talking about leadership and the responsibility and accountability that's associated with being a leader. Let me start, though, by reminding you that someone thinks you have the potential to be a great leader, or else you wouldn't have been selected to be in this class. But leaders aren't born, they're made and they're developed. That means being a great leader takes continual effort and constant reflection, always being aware of what you say and do and how others are reacting to you. So our discussion points for today's class include being a bold leader and what that means, preparation, your role as a leader, and the A word, accountability. First, though, I've got a question that I want you to discuss in your group. What do you think are the top 5 most important factors that determine whether someone is a good leader? And after you've had a quick discussion and you've come up with your list, I want you to pick which of those 5 you think is the top factor. Your facilitator will give you some ideas to get your thoughts started. All right, I'm sure you came up with some great answers, but I bet most of you didn't think about the one factor that I feel is the only true determining factor. You see, in order to be an effective leader, you have to turn around and see at least one person following you. Well, I didn't mean that, to be a trick question, but I wanted you to think about the question in a deeper way than just the qualities of a great leader. Yeah, it's important for a leader to have good communication skills, be driven, care for their people, have high character and integrity, and be trustworthy, and all the other things that I'm sure probably were on your list. But I can assure you this, that there are a lot of people out there that have some of these qualities that don't have people following them. So in reality, a person isn't a leader unless at least one person is willing to follow them. You see, if no one's following you, you might as well be out there taking a walk. People, whether your teammates, your friends, your classmates, they have to see value in what you're trying to do, where you're going, and what you're trying to accomplish. They need to feel inspired to be a part of that. I think it might be helpful to start with a more formal definition of leadership. There's a lot of great definitions out there that describe leadership, but let's use this one for our time together today. Let's define leadership as this: influencing human behavior so that an individual or team reaches their true potential or attains their desired goal. Well, now, what do you think is the key word in this definition? Yeah, influencing. What does the word influence mean? Well, influence means the power that somebody has to affect other people's thinking or their actions by means of example, by their behavior, or even the force of their own personality. I want to stop the video again for just a minute, and I want you to discuss in your small groups some of the different ways someone like you can influence another person. As I'm sure you discussed, there are many ways to influence people, both positively and negatively. Let me share some ways that I hope that you talked about in your groups. How about the language that you use in everyday speech? Are your words mostly positive or mostly negative? How do you handle a situation, good or bad? How about the decisions that you make? Who you hang out with? How you treat other people, especially those that others might look down upon? How do you handle criticism, or how do you handle praise? How do you handle adversity? How about your work ethic, your attitude and your approach to school? The values or the lack of values you demonstrate. And finally, what type of teammate you are. As you can see, there are a lot of ways in which you can influence others. I just want you to realize how easy it is to make an impact on someone through your actions. Let's be clear about something up front though. Leadership is vital in creating a true team. Teams are important because teams are the way to get things done, not individuals. Individuals may score points, but teams win. I want to share 4 basic facts with you about leadership that might surprise you. Here they are. Number 1, teams and organizations don't fail until their leaders do. See, teams reflect that leadership. The direction, the mentality, and the goals of any team start at the top. Number 2, right now we have a tremendous shortage of effective, positive leaders. Now, I'm not talking about people in leadership roles. We got a lot of those. I'm referring to the true leaders out there, people who lead through a set of values and principles, who will step forward to solve problems and not be afraid to set ambitious goals. See, people see a reason to follow these types of leaders. Number 3, leadership, listen carefully, leadership is not a function of titles. It is a function of relationships. My guess is that many of you will be captains of your teams next year. Some of you may already be a captain, and that's great. But let me give you some real helpful advice. Being named captain does not guarantee you that your teammates will follow your leadership. All it does is it just gives you an opportunity. It buys you some time. Your teammates will decide whether they will follow your leadership based on whether they want to go where you want to lead them. See, it's your job to prove them that where you want to lead them is where they need and should want to go. And finally, people want responsibility, but let me tell you, they don't want the accountability that goes along with it. That's not an option for a leader. One comes with the other. Okay, let's get into our first topic, bold leadership. Well, what do we mean by the term bold leadership? Well, let me share a sports story that I think will illustrate this point. In 1987, the LA Lakers won the NBA championship with Pat Riley as their coach. And after the game, the players and the coaches were celebrating in the locker room, spraying each other with champagne, and all that goes on with the championship at the professional level. Reporters were interviewing Pat Riley and asking him the usual questions when one reporter, kind of out of the blue, asked Coach Riley, "Do you think you can repeat as champions in 1988? You know, you got to admit, isn't that just like a reporter? Not even letting the coach sit back and enjoy what he's just accomplished without asking him about next year. But you see, it was a legitimate question because at that time, no NBA team had won back-to-back titles in a long time. I think it was around 1969. Riley was courteous, and he responded as you might expect him to. He says, if we stay free of major injuries, young players continue to develop, and we get some breaks, yeah, we can repeat. And then Coach Riley then went on to answer some of the other questions from the group. And then all of a sudden, he circled back to the reporter that asked him about repeating. And he said, "Would you mind asking me that question one more time?" The reporter said, "Sure. Do you think you can repeat?" Riley then said this, "I guarantee you that we will repeat, and you can print that." Well, that caught everybody's attention, particularly one of his players who happened to be walking by and heard his coach put a lot of pressure on next year's team. The player said, "Hey, coach, that champagne's supposed to go on your head. Don't let it get in your head. Be careful what you say to these folks." But you see, the reason Coach Riley changed how he answered that question wasn't because he was being arrogant or wanted to demean the other teams, but it was because of this. He said, "My original answer gave a bunch of yes. You know, if we do this, if this happens, etc., etc." He said, all I was doing was sending a bunch of failure messages to my team in disguise. What I was telling them is if these things don't occur, then I don't expect them to win the championship. It was like I was leaving the back door open for them to escape if things started getting tough. I decided that day to slam the back door shut and eliminate any of the potential excuses. Because see, I knew we were capable of repeating, and I wanted my team to know that that was exactly what I expected of them. Well, here's the rest of the story. The LA Lakers repeated as NBA champions in 1988. Now that's being a bold leader. You see, as a leader, you have to have high expectations, and you got to be not afraid to share them. I read in a book a while back called The Leader in You, a very simple challenge to all of us in leadership roles. It was called The Challenge of a Leader. It said, first, you need to push more than others think is safe. You need to care more than others think is wise. You need to dream more than others think is practical. And finally, you need to expect more than others think is possible. Are you willing to step up and demonstrate bold leadership? Are you willing to challenge your teams and hold yourself and your teammates accountable? I want you to think about these as we now move on to the next section. Okay, the second area we want to talk about is preparation. All of you are used to having a game plan, a strategy for your respective sports and your games. Let me make it perfectly clear up front though. Listen carefully. Hope is not a good strategy. Let me say it again. Hope is not a good strategy. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean things like, I hope I do well on my next test. I hope the team is working hard enough for next season. I hope we're not taking this next team lightly. I hope all my teammates are keeping their grades up. You see, in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a popular term being used in the business world called insanity. The definition for insanity was this: doing what you've always done and then expecting different results. Or if you want to paraphrase it, you could say, if you always do what you've always done, you're going to always get what you always got, or worse. In a group your size, I'm certain that some of you had seasons last year, maybe even a season that you're currently in, that were less than what you had hoped for. It might even have been a losing season. Now let's think a minute about what do you plan to do different next year, starting right now, to change those results. Larry Bosty was a very successful CEO, and he wrote a book called Execution. And in that he said, execution in its simplest form is exposing reality and then having the courage to act on it. Well, how does that apply to you? Well, it means the first key to being a leader is to understand what is the reality of your situation. What are the facts that you're dealing with? You see, many leaders don't like to face reality because they don't like what they see. So they pretend that things are different, or they hope things will just get better on their own. Remember what we said earlier, hope is not being a good strategy. Aldous Huxley, the famous English author who wrote Brave New World, he once stated, facts don't cease to be facts simply because we choose to ignore them. So, what are the facts? What are the reality about your team right now? You see, if your season wasn't what you wanted it to be, there needs to be a clear understanding of why that happened. My guess is you probably already know why. But if you're not willing to step forward and address the reality of your respective teams, then you're going to be just like that definition of insanity. You're going to continue to do what you've always done and expect different results. I'm going to let you in on a secret. You're not going to get any different results. Nothing will change. And by the definition that we just laid out a minute ago, you're going to be insane. The first thing you need to address this off-season is the reality of where you are and what truly needs to change if you're going to expect different results. For those of you that are coming off great seasons, well, congratulations. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. What you did last year might not be good enough for you to be successful in this next season. It's also no guarantee that you're going to continue to do the good things that put you in a position to be successful. Each year is a new year with new team dynamics, with different teammates, different coaches sometimes, different leaders, and different challenges. So don't just assume that things will continue as they have. Make sure your team is properly prepared for next season. Preparation is the first step because, see, with preparation comes confidence. And then with confidence comes execution. And then with execution comes results. Okay, now let's go to the next key area that we need to cover today, and that's your role as a leader. I'm going to share some specific things that you can do to make yourself a more effective leader. Number one, take charge. Let your team know that you want to be their leader through your actions. You don't have to be vocal. You can take charge by your behavior and your work ethic. Just don't be too shy, though. Next, concentrate on the vision and the commitment. If you concentrate on the vision and the level of the commitment that's being made by the team to accomplish your vision, the results will follow. Third, be focused on the right things and be goal-oriented. Make sure that you and your team don't get distracted. You must stay focused. Next, listen carefully to this one. Look into your teammates' eyes. Let me tell you a story. Back in the 90s, Duke was playing UNLV in the finals for the NCAA basketball Final Four. They were actually the semifinals. Coach K was the coach at Duke, and both teams were obviously very good, or they wouldn't have survived that long in the tournament. But in that game, however, UNLV blew Duke off the court. They actually intimidated Duke, who usually is used to being the intimidator, not the intimidated. They lost by the largest margin of any Final Four game up to that time. It was an embarrassing time for the Blue Devils. Ironically, the very next year, the same two teams get matched up once again in the semifinals. They virtually had the same players back, and the media was just making a big deal about what happened in last year's game, and Coach K wasn't going to let his team forget that game either. Prior to the game, Coach K gathered his team, and he gave them a very simple message. He said, "Men, tonight UNLV is going to look you in the eyes, and what they see will determine the outcome of this game." Well, what he was saying was if UNLV didn't see determination, they didn't see confidence and commitment, it was going to be all over before it even started. They would once again feel that they could intimidate Duke and bully them into submission. That same statement that Coach K made to his team applies to your team. I assure you that you can tell a lot about a team by looking into its players' eyes, not just before a game, but in the off-season, in the preseason, and at practice. I'm going to suggest that you make it a practice to continually look into your teammates' eyes and ask yourself, what do you see? Do you see support or you see distrust? You see confidence or doubt? Do you see enthusiasm or just going through the motions? Do you see that unwavering commitment to get it right, or do you see whatever happens is okay? Next, begin with the end in mind. Set your goals early, now. The off-season is the best time to get this done. Establish those goals early, repeat them often, and continuously evaluate how you're doing. Build up your teammates in front of the team. Constantly encourage and build up your teammates. But be careful. You got to be authentic. Nothing will undermine a leader more than being fake. People can see right through that. You can't fake your behavior or your true self and get away with it as a leader for very long. Deal with situations, not problems. You see, situations don't become problems until you mishandle the situation. Try to deal with things while they're still just a situation. It's a lot easier. Create high expectations. The more you expect, the more you'll accomplish. Athletes shouldn't be intimidated by aggressive goals, but I'll tell you this, I'll assure you if you lower your expectations, people will quickly adapt and meet them. It all starts with a leader who has the courage to challenge the team. Next, be consistent. Your team must know what to expect from you. Be decisive. People like to follow people who are not afraid to make a decision or take a stand. Now that doesn't mean that you're going to always be right or not get even made fun of, but be strong enough to take educated risk. Create a sense of urgency in everything you do. People will always want you to slow down the pace. They say it's too hard, or they tell you the goals are impossible. Stay on course. Stay on task. Don't get distracted. If the team is comfortable, you know you're not moving fast enough. And finally, help your teammates know their individual goals. Their goal needs to become a contributor, not a starter. Not everyone can start, but everyone can and must contribute. All right, we're rounding the last curve, coming home. Our last topic, accountability, the A word. Remember we said at the beginning that people want responsibility, but they don't want the accountability that goes along with it? I want to share a letter that I saw from a college coach to a prospective recruit. And that letter was sharing their coaching and their team's philosophy. And I think it shares a great message on accountability. The letter read, and I quote, "We are what we are for a reason." In other words, no alibis, rationalizing, laying blame, that stuff. Then it went on to say, "What we see on film and in our performance is solely the result of our leadership, our coaching, our preparation, and commitment." And then it said, "or simply what we have allowed to happen." Now, what part of that statement do you think stands out most to you? Well, I hope it's the last one, what we have allowed to happen. What does this mean? What are some examples of this? Well, loafing, not working out in the off season, not doing film study, being negative, poor concentration, not keeping the grades up, lack of commitment. These are just some of the quick ideas that come to my mind. I'm sure that you can think of others. I'm going to suggest that this is a key component to whether a team is successful or not. What does the leadership of that team allow to happen? What will they accept and what will they not tolerate? You see, you and I are not going to be judged by the situations or the conditions that we find ourselves in, but rather how we respond to them. We can't avoid situations. Some situations we create and bring on ourselves, but sometimes things just happen. The only thing that we got control over is how we react or how we respond to those events in our lives. This fact holds true for individuals in everyday life as well as athletic teams. As a leader, you must make sure your team understands this fact. Next, you're in the performance business. You're not in the reason why business as a leader. This is one of the first things you need to teach your teammates. It doesn't take much ability to simply say why something didn't happen. It's easy to come up with excuses. It's your job as leaders to not allow this to happen. Remember, what are you going to allow to happen on your team? In closing, I want to leave you with a very simple comparison. I want you to remember that there's always going to be three kinds of teams out there. There's going to be teams that make things happen. There's going to be teams that watch things happen. And unfortunately, there are going to be teams that ask themselves, what happened? Make sure you're on the right team when your season is over, because you are their leader. It's been a pleasure and a privilege sharing with you today, and I want to wish each of you the very best as you lead your respective teams. At this time, your facilitator has some things that we want you to discuss regarding my message today.